Not even a cupboard? There was a wardrobe, for Miss Loach disliked cupboards, as she thought clothes did not get sufficiently aired in them. A wardrobe, and of course anyone might have hid under the bed, but I did not look. And I don't think," added Mrs. Herne, examining her rings, "that anyone was about. Miss Loach was always very suspicious and searched the house regularly." "Did she, then, anticipate anyone hiding, a burglar, for instance?" "Yes, I think she did. Her nature was warped from certain events which happened in her early life, and she suspected everyone." "Was she on bad terms with anyone?" "No. She never quarrelled. I am the quarrelsome person," said the lady, smiling. "I quarrelled with Mr. Clancy, who is a rude man, but we have made it up since, and he has apologized. It was Mr. Clancy who told me of your wish to see me. Do you want to ask anything else?" "If you do not mind." "On the contrary, I am anxious to afford you all the information in my power. Nothing would give me more satisfaction than to see the murderer of my dear friend brought to justice." She spoke with great feeling, and there was an unmistakable ring of truth about her speech. Jennings began to think he must be wrong in suspecting her to have anything to do with the death. All the same, he was on his guard. It would not do to let Mrs. Herne, clever as she was, pull the wool over his eyes. "Have you any idea who killed Miss Loach?" he asked. "No. She was quite well on that evening, and did not anticipate death in any way, least of all in a violent form. Mr. Hale, Mr. Clancy, and myself would have been with her till nearly midnight had I not quarrelled with Mr. Clancy. As it was, Mr. Hale escorted me home about 9:30, and I understand Mr. Clancy left about 10. When Miss Loach was not playing whist or bridge, she never cared about having anyone in her house. She rather liked her privacy." "Did she expect anyone that evening?" "No. At all events she said nothing about expecting anyone." "Did she expect her nephew?" "Mr. Basil Saxon?" said Mrs. Herne, looking surprised. "Not that I am aware of. She did not mention his name. To be sure they were on bad terms, and she had forbidden him in the house. No, I do not think she expected him." "Do you know what the quarrel was about?" "It had something to do with money. I believe Miss Loach helped Mr. Saxon, who was rather extravagant, but she grew weary of his demands and refused to help him further. He lost his temper and said things which forced her to order him out of the house." "Did he utter any threats?" "Miss Loach never said that he did." "Mr. Jennings," remarked the old lady, bending her brows, "is it possible you suspect that young man?" "No, I suspect no one at present, but I am bound to make inquiries in every direction, and of course, if Mr. Saxon is of a passionate temper, he might wish to avenge himself for being forbidden the house." "He has a temper," said Mrs. Herne thoughtfully, "but I never saw it exhibited, though I met him once at Miss Loach's. She said he had a lot of bad blood in him, but that may have been because she hated her sister Isabella Octagon." "Did she hate her?" "Yes, and I think she had cause. Mrs. Octagon behaved very badly in connection with some romantic episode of the past." "I fancy I know about that," said Jennings quickly, then added, "You are fond of perfumes?" "What a strange question!" laughed Mrs. Herne. "Yes, I am. Do you like this scent? It's called Haiku, and was given to me by a dear friend who received it from a Japanese attaché." "From a friend or relative?" Mrs. Herne frowned. "What do you mean by that?" Jennings shrugged his shoulders. "Oh, nothing. Only you are very like a lady called Senora Gredos." "Maraquito," said Mrs. Herne unexpectedly. "Of course I am. Her father was my brother." "You are then her aunt?" "Naturally. But the fact is, I do not proclaim the relationship, as I do not approve of Maraquito's gambling. Of course the poor thing is confined to her couch, and must have something to amuse her. All the same, gambling on a large scale is against my principles. But if asked, I do not disown the relationship. Now you understand why I am like Maraquito?" "I understand," hesitated Jennings. "You belong to a Spanish family?" "Spanish Jews. I am a Jewess. So is Maraquito." "Do you speak Spanish?" "Yes. Do you wish to speak it with me?" "Unfortunately I do not know the language," said Jennings, profoundly regretting the fact. "And your niece?" "She does not speak it. She was brought up here in England." "In that case she should ask you if her name is masculine or feminine, Mrs. Herne." The old lady started. "I should like to know what you mean." "Senora Gredos' Christian name should be Maraquita, not Maraquito." "Really! I never gave the matter a thought. I will tell her about it if you like." "I said she did not speak Spanish. She has led a strange life. At one time she wished to dance, and took the name of Celestine Durand. She was taught by a professor of dancing called Le Beau, who lives in Pimlico, but while learning she slipped in the street and became the wreck you see her." Certainly Mrs. Herne was very frank, and she spoke the truth, as all this bore out the statements of Le Beau and Lord Caranby. "Her maiden name was Saul, I believe," said Jennings, thinking Mrs. Herne would deny this promptly. To his astonishment she did nothing of the sort. "My maiden name is Saul," she said gravely. "But as Maraquito is the daughter of my unfortunate brother, her true name is the same, not her maiden name, you understand. I do not know how you learned this, but Lord Caranby paid a visit to Maraquito's salon, and recognized that she was a Saul from her likeness to Emilia, with whom he was in love," finished Mrs. Herne, crossing her hands. "That painful story is well known to me. Emilia was my sister." "Lord Caranby never told me she had one," said Jennings. "Lord Caranby does not know the history of our family, save what appears in the papers," put in the detective. Mrs. Herne flushed through her sallow skin. "It is not well bred of you to refer to the misfortunes of my family," she said. "My mother and brother were unlucky. They were innocent of this charge of coining, brought against them by an enemy." "The evidence was very plain, Mrs. Herne." "Ha!" she flashed out. "You have been looking up the case. Why?" "From what Lord Caranby said " "He had no right to say anything," cried Mrs. Herne, rising and speaking vehemently. "He loved my sister, and she lost her life at that dreadful house. I was abroad at the time, and had only just married. My husband was a jeweler. We cut ourselves off from the family when the misfortune came. Only of late years did I recognize Maraquito when she came to me for assistance. Her father died, and she had no money. I helped her to pay for her dancing." "Oh," said Jennings, recalling the false money. "You paid?" "Have you anything to say on that point?" she asked haughtily. "No, no. I merely congratulate you on your generosity." "I could not allow my own niece to starve. I helped her, and then she met with that accident. After that " "You assisted her to start this gambling house?" "By no means. Mr. Hale found the money for that. He is in love with Maraquito. But you can understand why I do not proclaim my relationship with her. The past of our family is too painful. I became acquainted with Miss Loach through Mrs. Octagon. She was then the wife of Mr. Saxon, when I went to inquire into my sister's death. I liked Miss Loach and frequently went to see her. Now that she is dead I shall leave England. I have arranged to do so next week, and you will not see me here again. That is why I gave you this chance to make inquiries." "I am much obliged," said Jennings, quite believing her story, since she told it so earnestly. "But does Maraquito love Hale?" "No, she loves Mr. Mallow, Lord Caranby's nephew." "She has a rival in Miss Saxon," said the detective. Mrs. Herne turned red. "My niece fears no rival," she said haughtily.